Hi, I'm Dr. J. Franklin Schultz. I'm a registered psychotherapist here in the state of Colorado, a law enforcement chaplain, and a retired police officer and educator for about 4 decades. I want to talk to you today about the issue of anger, but first I want to tell you how much I appreciate what you do and want to encourage you to continue to fight the good fight, to keep things in perspective, and to recognize that there are many, many, many people out there who, whether they're vocal about it or not, are very supportive of what you do. So God bless you, and be sure to let me know if there's anything that I can do for you, pray about, or encourage you. So let's talk about this issue of anger. Is it more prevalent in law enforcement? We attribute a lot of maladaptive behavior to people in law enforcement because of the perception that it's a very stressful occupation, and nobody's going to argue that it's not stressful. But some of the claims that are made about the prevalence of substance abuse, domestic violence, suicide, divorce rates, being astronomically higher in the police population relative to other populations aren't really substantiated very well statistically. But I know that we can understand where these presumptions might come from, and whether it's more prevalent in policing or not, it's an issue. Anger, I think, is a unique issue in policing because anger is associated with the primitive survival perspectives and biochemistry, and we're in survival mode and highly aware of dealing with threats constantly, and we'll talk about how that relates to the issue of anger as well. So, anger can be rage, it can be short-temperedness, it can be impatience, it can be frustration, and it can be internalized negative thinking that might cause us to engage in negative self-talk, a negative self-image, frustration, and possibly even suicidal thoughts. So when we talk about anger, we might at first glance say, well, I'm not flying off the handle all the time. I don't go into rage. I don't get really angry very often. And so you want to honestly assess whether you have an anger issue. But if you have a constant simmering discomfort, if you're short-tempered, if you cut yourself off from people because you don't want to engage in any conflict, if you're conflict avoidant, if you have some stress-related illnesses, perhaps that might be a manifestation of anger. And here's the world that we live in. We live in a world of injustice. Theologically, we understand, if we're Christians, that we live in a fallen world. Now that we're sinners and we're dealing with sinners all the time, and we're dealing with sinners in a fallen world. So bad things are going to happen, stupid things are going to happen, destructive things are going to happen, and we're not immune to any of those things. But it's our job to go out and wade in the middle of that and try to solve problems that really seem like maybe there's no solution. We have a frustrating system. We have a frustrating bureaucracy. We have a frustrating judicial system. And so the things that we want to do to go out there and bring peace to the world as peace officers, the things that we want to do to go out there and calm people down and help people act right and protect the innocent and make sure that the guilty are held accountable for their actions, that's very frustrating because we don't see immediate results of our efforts very often, and it's a very cumbersome kind of system. And one of the things that we know about anger is, although it's one of the 6 basic emotions recognized by psychologists as universal to the human experience, anger is really a child of frustration. And that's good to know because we can more easily identify the things that frustrate us more than the things that really make us angry. In fact, we may not even realize that we're angry. But we can often recognize frustration. It's that oh my gosh, I can't believe this kind of feeling. Or I can't believe I'm going to be late to work because Mrs. McGillicuddy is driving 25 miles an hour in front of me. Or there's a crash that I didn't know about 5 miles down the interstate and I passed the last exit. So that frustration can lead to aggression because that frustration represents a threat to our expectations and our sense of who we are and who we want to be and what we want to accomplish for the day. And any threat that is recognized or perceived by the body is first going to be perceived down here in that lizard brain that I talk about. And the lizard brain can kind of take over. Now, most of the time, we're able to transfer that thinking up here to our logic brain, to the frontal cortex, and we can start saying, oh, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm not going to get mad about that, or I'll find a solution to that, or I'll solve this problem, or I'll just deal with it in a rational way, or I'll disregard that person, or I'll cut myself off, and somehow we're going to manage that frustration. And it's much easier to manage and recognize at that stage than when we get angry and we're in full-blown fight, flight, body chemistry. Because that's what anger is. It's equipping us to deal with a threat. And so anger is certainly normal. It can have a function. And I would say that anger, in order to have an appropriate place in our lives, should be brief. It shouldn't be constant. It shouldn't be ongoing. The Bible says don't let the sun go down in your anger. The Bible says to be angry but don't sin. So anger is okay. It serves a function. But it needs to be brief and it needs to be focused. What are we angry at? What's causing that anger? What's the spring and the fountain of that anger? And a lot of times, if it's just this one thing that kind of ticks us off and makes us angry, we think that that's the source of our anger. But we may be preloaded and ready to be triggered by some things that cause us to be more angry than we need to. And we end up being angry at our kids and at our spouses and our coworkers, our friends, angry at ourselves. And that's not healthy because anger needs to be focused at the real true source of what's causing our frustration. And then it needs to be purposeful. And because anger is designed to accomplish something in our existence. And if it's not accomplishing something for our survival or for our good, then it's not a healthy manifestation of anger. So I would ask you to test yourself. As I said in a previous video, if we want to ask ourselves the question, gee, is this a problem? In this case, is anger a problem for me? Does it affect our relationships? Does it affect our job? Does it affect our involvement with the law? Does it affect our health? And those are the basic questions. And if it's yeah to any of those, then anger is problematic. We will often deceive ourselves and say, well, I don't go into a rage, and therefore I'm not an angry person. When I'm angry with somebody, I just stop talking to them and cut them off. Well, folks, that's a manifestation of anger, and it's not healthy. It doesn't develop good relationships. It doesn't feel good ultimately to us in our human existence. And we might say, well, I don't get angry that often, maybe once a week or once a day. A lot of times we're justifying our anger, and we feel perfectly fine with being angry because dadgummit, anybody would. If they were living in my shoes and they saw what I saw and dealt with what I dealt with and know what I know, they'd be angry too. And so we're very happy with our own anger because we feel like it's righteous indignation and we're perfectly okay to have it. But again, from a theological point of view, if you have a Christian biblical worldview, you know that seeking out vengeance or revenge is not a Christian virtue. In fact, the Bible specifically says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So sometimes we have this aggression and the sense of justice that we need to render in the world, and it's taking responsibility over that is not really our individual or human responsibility. Some of the other kinds of anger that gets manifest, as I said before, is it can be internalized, and sometimes we kick ourselves because we don't create boundaries. We don't say no to people. We don't communicate well with people. We don't let people know that we're frustrated, and we don't feel like we have permission to be ourselves. And so that makes us angry, but we can't manifest that because we want to be in such self-control, and we want to be a good Christian and not manifest anger. So we press that inside, and it causes health problems and depression and lack of motivation. And again, this narrative, I'm no good at this. I'm impotent at dealing with the world, and nobody likes me, nobody understands me, and all that kind of negative self-talk can be a manifestation of anger as well. And I would really encourage you, if you really want to be honest with yourself, to ask your loved ones, ask your kids, your spouse, your coworkers, do you think I have an anger problem? Do you think I'm aggressive in any way? Do you think it's an issue I should deal with? Do you think I communicate my feelings very well? Do you think I shut down when I probably ought to confront things? Do you sense that I have a constant level of frustration? Are you afraid to bring up certain subjects because you'll think that I'll react in a negative or aggressive or assertive? Assertiveness, I'm going to say, is good. Aggressiveness, maybe not. But can I handle stuff? Do I have a low frustration level, a low tolerance level? Am I impatient? All those kinds of things. And if they're honest with you and you're willing to listen and not lash out when they are honest, you'll find out whether you have an anger problem or not. Now, because the root of anger is frustration, again, we can deal with frustration because that's a precursor, and it's something that we can probably be a little bit more aware of. And although it pushes our buttons and it's starting that brain chemistry that can reach anger and fruition from the lizard brain, just recognize the process of frustration. We are engaged in behavior, whether it's getting up and getting in uniform and going ready to work, or whether it's working out, or whether it's cooking, whatever behavior we engage in. Once we get out of bed, just even the decision to get out of bed is always goal directed, and the motivation for that is some need that we have that reaching the goal will satisfy. And so we'll take something simple like getting out of bed. Well, I get out of bed because I get hungry, or I have to go to the bathroom, or I have an appointment, I have to go to work, or I get bored and I know that I need to do something, or I have this conscience that says, you need to get up and go jogging or work out on the bicycle or something. So there's a motivation there, and that gets us up, it causes us to engage in behavior that reaches the goal. Okay, I've had breakfast, I've done my workout, now a new goal and a new behavior takes over. And of course, for those of you that are still going to work every day, you have a goal-directed behavior that gets you to go to the office. And let's say you're trying to go to the office, and you have this set of expectations. And the expectation is that it's going to take you this long to get there. You've got a little bit of room to wiggle. You may have a routine of going by and getting a cup of coffee at the drive-thru. So you've got your routine, you've got your expectations, you've got your template for how to reach that goal of getting to work. If anything interferes with that, a slow driver, a crash on the interstate, your restaurant that your drive-through being closed or extraordinarily busy that day, or you get bad service, you get a flat tire. Anything that interferes with that goal-direct behavior is a roadblock, and that's going to cause frustration. And then, of course, we can either deal with that frustration in a very healthy way, or we can deal with that frustration in a dysfunctional way. But the anger that you feel when you feel frustrated is an illustration of the kind of outgrowth from our goal-directed behavior based on our expectations and our motivations, and then the frustration when there's a roadblock in that goal-directed behavior, and that frustration, if it comes to fruition and we don't deal with it pretty quickly in a positive way, either by acting or thinking in a positive way to solve a problem, is going to end up manifesting in anger. So recognizing that frustration is normal and it's something that we can recognize and deal with is I think very important to understand the anger management. So recognizing those precursors of when is my body getting tense? What is it that always ticks me off? And sometimes we borrow, which is, Jesus said the day has enough trouble for itself. Don't worry about tomorrow. Doesn't mean that we don't plan or anticipate, but don't borrow trouble, because you know that you've been on your way to work and you think, I bet that knucklehead sergeant is going to put me on this assignment, and I hate that. That makes me so mad when he does it. He has no disregard for my wishes and blah blah blah, and we start this whole narrative about something that hasn't even happened yet. So we're borrowing that. We might get to work and find out that the sergeant's sick that day, and hey, maybe you're in charge that shift. So borrowing trouble is something that we often do, and we sometimes do that on a real consistent basis. Like, our finances are always bothering me, or the way that my spouse relates to me, or doesn't appreciate me, or doesn't do what I like her to do, or the kids, the darn teenagers, they never want to spend time with me. It's not like they appreciate how hard I work, and they complain that I'm never around, but that's because I have all that kind of stuff. Is just borrowing trouble, borrowing trouble, borrowing trouble. So learning how to focus in on what is the issue with your anger. Now, again, from a therapeutic standpoint, it's really important that everybody understand their family of origin. And I'm not saying blaming your parents, but I'm saying that your family of origin is where you learned how to deal with your anger, with frustration, with having to wait, with patience, with your temper, with the normal ups and downs of life when things didn't go their way. And you need to really think about what the adults in your household, the caregivers, mom and dad, if you came from the traditional family that I did, mom and dad, and how they dealt with anger. Did they sublimate it? Did they drink? Did they engage in violence? Were they very impatient with you? Were they hypocritical with you? When you were angry, they got angry at your anger and manifested anger because you were angry, because they're seeing a reflection of themselves that's very uncomfortable for them. So the way that you dealt with, that your family dealt with conflict, that you were imprinted and taught how to deal with conflict, and how to deal with unpleasant emotions, and whether you were felt safe in expressing frustration and anger without having it capped, or without fearing that there was going to be a terribly violent backlash. So it's very likely that the way that you were taught to deal with anger is the way that you're going to deal with anger today, and that can be very dangerous, particularly if there was a history of abuse or substance abuse or violence in the home. You're going to be prone to do that, not because you're a bad person, but because of all the ways to learn how to deal with stuff. That's the way you were taught how to deal with stuff. And you may have grown up like most people do, saying, I will never do that. I will never slap my kid out of anger. I will never talk to my wife that way. I will never get mad at my daughter when she's angry about frustration. I'll never make fun of somebody when they have a failure. And you can say that all you want, but eventually you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to find yourself repeating those kinds of patterns. Good patterns as well as unhealthy patterns. And even trying to change that, if you don't understand the root and the source of that, is going to be probably more likely to be like pressing that down and sublimating that, and just kind of ignoring that background rather than processing it. So recognizing precursors, recognizing your family history, recognizing, and when I say precursors, what makes me frustrated, and then recognizing what your expectations are, right? Because it's the shortage in expectations, it's that template in your goal-directed behavior that sets the tone of what's going to go right in your life. And if something is off of that expectation, then something's not going right, it's going wrong. And that means you're out of control, which is frustrating, which can lead to anger. And if you feel like you're never in control, like life never works out the way that you want it to, God just is not blessing me the way that I expect him to, then you're going to have chronic anger, and you're going to have trigger points that manifest itself in very frequent anger. People are going to stop communicating with you, stop telling the truth with you, and it's going to be a long, hurtful process. And so what that means is that there's sometimes we just have to adjust our expectations, let it go. And I know it's easier said than done, but just recognize, all right, well, can I really problem solve here? Is this thing that's causing me frustration really solvable? Can I do something about it? Is it my job to do that? Do I have to make them understand how I feel? Do I have to make them respect me? Do I have to do whatever it is that's frustrating you? Probably not. You can just let go of control. And again, theologically, I want you to think about this from a worldview, the biblical worldview that helps us stay away from anger is, first of all, we have a tremendous self-worth in the eyes of God. And so it doesn't matter whether anybody respects us. I mean, I know it matters, but at our very core, our outlook on life and who we are, God loves us. He made us. He knows us. He has a purpose and a plan for us. And it may be rough. It may be difficult. Nobody else may endorse it. Everybody else may be down on you, which is never the truth, by the way. We get into this mythological thinking that this one or set of experiences defines the whole universe and how it relates to us. That's not true. That's some thinking that you need to adjust there. But at its core, God loves me and I'm a person of worth. Secondly, I trust God with the outcome. Now that Romans 8:28, all things work together, that's a really good pat you on the head, feel good verse. But if you look at that in context, the biblical writer there is really talking about some very difficult circumstances. And so we want to trust God to be in control, but we don't want to make an idol God, this God who's going to do everything by our template, by our expectations and our time frame, because then we're going to be frustrated at God. We're not really frustrated at God. We're frustrated at who we thought God was. So we just need to accept God for who he is and trust him. And again, those of us that have a biblical worldview, we know that whatever doesn't work out now is going to work out in the end. We look at Genesis, the fall, Revelation, the new world, and we know that God's got it covered. And that's easy to preach, hard to live, but that's the reality of the believer's worldview. And then the Bible talks a lot about forgiveness. And for lack of forgiveness is the origin of lots of anger, the things that people have done to us in the past. Now, forgiveness is a process. We recognize that we have a hard time with forgiveness because they don't deserve it. They haven't asked for forgiveness. I don't want to condone their behavior. All of those things, forgiveness ultimately is a discipline, and it's something that happens, something that very seldom happens because, oh, I know I'm supposed to forgive that person, so it's forgiven. But if we don't really process that, including acknowledging our anger and the injustice of that, then we're really not going to come to a place where we can really kind of cleanse ourselves and leave vengeance up to God, because that's another factor. We're not allowed to take vengeance. That's not our job, not even in law enforcement. We're supposed to help society hold people accountable for their behavior, but vengeance is not ours, not for any terrible thing. That's up to God, and God will absolutely righteously judge those things that we think are perhaps part of our responsibility to beat down and to solve and resolve. So I certainly in this 25 minutes or so haven't given you all of the answers to dealing with your anger, but if you recognize it, recognize the precursors, let a few things go, relax about a few things, choose your battles, and let other people help you work through this anger process. I think you'll be a happier individual. You'll live longer, and you'll serve better. So if you have any suggestions about anything else that you'd like to hear me talk about, or if you want to communicate with me and ask me a specific question, if you have an issue that you'd like me to maybe deal with, and give me a text or a call. My contact information is on the website. And again, make sure that you know how many people, myself included, appreciate what you do every day. And I encourage you to be smart and be safe. And God bless you.